The autumn charity gala in Portland smelled like mulled cider and cedar, the kind of scent that made everything feel more magical than it really was. After 7 years away, I was finally back in my hometown, walking into the historic Benson Hotel ballroom like I owned the place. But I wasn't alone. Marcus Stone walked beside me, his hand resting gently at the small of my back as we passed beneath the crystal chandelier. He had that magnetic presence that made people turn their heads, before they even realized why. In his charcoal gray suit and silver tie, hair perfectly tousled, he looked like he'd stepped off a movie poster. Phones lifted instinctively as we moved through the crowd. This wasn't Hollywood, but the townspeople suddenly found themselves sharing space with a man whose face had graced billboards across the Pacific Northwest for years. I'd met Marcus 3 years ago on a commercial shoot in Seattle, back when my world revolved around camera angles and lighting setups rather than red carpets and exclusive restaurants. I wasn't looking for love then, especially not from someone like him. But Marcus had been genuine, patient in a way that fame couldn't manufacture. Somewhere between our fourth collaboration and a week of sunrise coffee runs while filming in the Oregon wine country, I found myself saying yes when he asked me to dinner. We'd kept things private, not because he was hiding me, but because I treasured our quiet moments together. Tonight felt intentional, though. This was our first public appearance in my world, not his. Portland's annual arts gala wasn't exactly the Met Gala, but it was enough of a stage for people who remembered me as the girl who worked at Powell's bookstore. And it was where Jessica would be. I hadn't seen my sister in over 7 years. Not since she'd looked me in the eye over breakfast at our favorite diner and casually mentioned she'd been sleeping with my fiancé, David, as if it were news I should thank her for sharing. I'd walked away that morning and never looked back. But I'd remembered one thing about Jessica, her obsession with Marcus Stone. She'd collected his magazine covers, memorized his commercial appearances, even drove 3 hours to Seattle once just to catch a glimpse of him at a film premiere. She used to joke, though her eyes were always serious, that meeting him would be destiny. Tonight, destiny was getting a rewrite. We'd barely reached the first cocktail station when I spotted her. Jessica stood near the auction displays in an emerald dress that caught the light with every movement. She was laughing with a group of local business owners, her hand touching the sleeve of the man beside her. But the moment her gaze found Marcus, the laughter died. I watched her face transform: surprise, recognition, disbelief, then something that looked almost predatory. Her eyes shifted to me, and I felt the exact moment she connected the dots. The smile that appeared was cold, calculating. It said, "You have something that should be mine." Marcus, unaware of the silent storm brewing, leaned down to comment on the beautiful venue. I smiled back at him, never breaking eye contact with Jessica, letting her see that his attention was completely mine. We mingled deeper into the crowd, greeting old acquaintances and accepting compliments I barely registered. Jessica didn't approach directly, but I could feel her circling like a hawk. And I knew my sister well enough to be certain she was already planning her next move. By morning, the gala had become the talk of Portland. Friends I hadn't heard from in years were messaging me, some just to say hi, others fishing for confirmation about whether I'd really been there with him. The Oregonian's website featured a front-page photo from the event, Marcus adjusting my necklace while I laughed, the ballroom chandelier sparkling above us. It was exactly the kind of image that made people create their own narratives. Didn't need to guess what Jessica's version looked like. She called our mother before dawn. I didn't hear the conversation, but I could imagine Jessica's voice, that carefully modulated concern. The suggestion that she was only worried about my well-being, barely concealing her true motives. By noon, my phone was buzzing with a call from Mom. "Emma," she said in that tone she reserved for delicate family situations, "I think it's time we had a proper family dinner. Just the 3 of us. We haven't all been together in far too long." I leaned against my kitchen counter, watching steam rise from my coffee. "Marcus can join us, right?" Though I already knew the answer. A pause confirmed my suspicion. Maybe it would be better with just family first. We could talk without distractions. Jessica raised some concerns about your relationship, and I cut her off. Concerns about what exactly? She thinks someone like him lives in a completely different world. She's worried it might not be healthy for you. The irony was breathtaking. It's my sister, who had destroyed my engagement without hesitation, now positioning herself as the voice of reason about my love life. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady me. Fine, I'll be there. Dinner was set for Thursday evening. Mom's house in the Alberta district looked unchanged, same vintage wallpaper. Same family photos lining the hallway. Same faint scent of lavender and whatever she'd been baking. Jessica was already seated when I arrived, wearing a soft blue sweater and an expression that could pass for sisterly warmth if you didn't know better. She greeted me with a light touch on my shoulder, as if 7 years of silence hadn't happened. We sat down to Mom's signature pot roast with roasted vegetables, everything plated perfectly, as if presentation could smooth over the tension crackling between us. The first few minutes were safe updates about neighbors, stories about our cousin's new baby, but I could feel the weight of their real agenda pressing closer. Jessica made the pivot. She set down her fork, clasped her hands, and looked at me with manufactured concern. Emma, I'm only saying this because I love you. But Marcus Stone isn't someone you can just date like a regular person. World is complicated, demanding. I don't want to see you get hurt. I met her gaze steadily. You mean you don't want me to be with him? She didn't flinch. I think you should end it before it gets messy. Mom made a small sound of agreement, as if Jessica had just shared profound wisdom. I looked between them, then reached for my wine glass, taking my time. I appreciate your concern, but my relationship is mine to manage. And I'm not ending anything because you've decided you don't approve. The rest of dinner passed in strained conversation. Jessica's eyes stayed on me, searching for weakness, but I gave her nothing. When I left, the crisp evening air felt cleaner. And I knew one thing for certain. My refusal had only made her more determined. It happened the following week. Marcus had been invited to a private reception at the Portland Art Museum, an intimate gathering for patrons and collectors. I was stuck with a client emergency, and since it wasn't the type of event that required both of us, he went alone. I wasn't worried. The art museum wasn't exactly a hotbed of temptation, and Marcus was the last person I'd ever doubt. But I hadn't counted on Jessica being there. Later, Marcus would recount the encounter in a tone both matter-of-fact and slightly bewildered. Like he still couldn't quite believe it had happened. He'd been admiring a contemporary sculpture, wine in hand, chatting with the curator about a community art project, when Jessica materialized beside him. No polite introduction, no acknowledgement that they'd only been in the same room once before. She simply inserted herself into the conversation as if they were old friends. She started talking about how suffocating small towns can be, Marcus told me later. Then she shifted to how someone like you must feel trapped in the Hollywood scene. She was intense. I could picture it perfectly, Jessica, tilting her head at that calculated angle, her voice dropping into that fintumate register she used when trying to be irresistible, her fingers brushing his arm in a way that looked accidental. She would have stood just close enough that her perfume reached him, just close enough that anyone watching would assume familiarity. Then she made her move. Emma's wonderful, she said, according to Marcus, but I imagine it's difficult for her to truly understand your lifestyle. Someone in the industry like me might be a better fit. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even veiled. She was telling him directly that she could be the one who understood him, who belonged at his side. Marcus told me he didn't raise his voice or let his expression change much. He simply set his wine on a nearby pedestal, turned to face her completely, and said, Jessica, the only woman I want in my life is your sister. There's nothing about my world I want to share with anyone else. She tried to laugh it off, he said, as if it were all a misunderstanding. But when she reached for his arm again, he stepped back not rudely. It's far enough to create space she couldn't cross without looking obvious. Then he excused himself and walked away, leaving her standing alone among the sculptures. When he told me everything that night in my apartment, we were curled up on the couch, city lights twinkling through the windows. He shook his head, running, his hand through his hair. "I don't think she's used to hearing no," he said. "She's not," I replied, threading my fingers through his. But she needed to. I imagined her in that moment, stunned, embarrassed, replaying the rejection in her mind. For someone like Jessica, it wasn't just about being turned down. It was about being rejected by the man she'd idolized for years in a setting where she couldn't spin it into something else. I knew then that whatever remained of her fantasy had shattered completely. By the time I decided on my course of action, the plan had crystallized so clearly it felt inevitable. I wasn't going to let Jessica's latest manipulation fade into whispered speculation like our history had before. This time, the truth was coming out with witnesses. I called my cousins first, the ones who'd been there 7 years ago. It's when my engagement imploded and our family fractured into polite factions. Then my aunts and uncles, then my dad, and finally my mom. I told everyone the same thing: family. Dinner at my place Saturday night, everyone, no exceptions. I didn't provide details, which only seemed to make people more eager to attend. When Saturday arrived, my dining room was fuller than it had been in years. The long table was set with every piece of china I owned, candles flickering against crystal glasses. Conversation buzzed as relatives reconnected, laughter spilling over from different corners of the room. Jessica arrived 15 minutes later. Calculated entrance in a sleek black dress, hairstyled to perfection, smile ready for cameras. She surveyed the table as if walking into her own celebration, then found her seat between two of our cousins. Marcus sat beside me at the head of the table, quiet and observant. His presence enough to keep certain people slightly off balance, Jessica included. Dinner began normally with small talk and passing dishes, but I didn't plan to wait for dessert. When the main course plates were cleared, I set down my glass and let my gaze travel the length of the table. There's a reason. I wanted everyone here tonight, I began, my voice calm but carrying easily. Some of you know pieces of this story, some know none of it. But I think it's time everything comes out. The room quieted. Jessica shifted in her chair, her smile becoming rigid. 7 years ago, I continued, I was engaged to David. One morning over breakfast, my sister sat across from me and casually mentioned she'd been sleeping with him. I ended the engagement, cut her out of my life, and tried to move on because I thought holding on to anger would only keep me stuck. A few cousins exchanged glances, but no one interrupted. Mom's eyes darted between Jessica and me, her face pale. Last week, I said. Jessica tried again. Different man this time. Someone I've been with for 3 years. Someone she's had a fantasy about since we were teenagers. She decided that because she got away with it once, maybe she could get away with it again. Jessica's voice cut across the table. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened, I said evenly. You cornered Marcus at an event, told him I couldn't understand his world the way you could, and tried to convince him you'd be a better match. You put your hands on him, and when that didn't work, you ran to Mom to try convincing me to break up with him. The room was electric now, all eyes moving between us. Mom turned to Jessica, her voice strained with disbelief. Is that true? Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it, her cheeks flushed, her composure cracking under so many stares. Why would you do that to your own sister? Mom pressed. I leaned back, candlelight catching the rim of my wineglass. It's simple. This isn't just about Marcus. This is about what she did 7 years ago and about her thinking there would never be consequences. Because I chose to walk away instead of fight back. But here's the truth. Jessica, this is me fighting. Says me making sure you can't pretend it never happened. The silence that followed was complete and heavy. No one rushed to fill it. No one changed the subject. Kay, my cousins avoided her gaze. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mom just stared at Jessica as if seeing a stranger. Jessica's smile had vanished entirely. She didn't apologize. Apologies weren't in her vocabulary, but she didn't deny it again either. As I looked at her across the table, I realized the real victory wasn't her embarrassment. It was knowing that now, every time she walked into a family gathering, everyone would know exactly who she was and what she'd done. The evening ended slowly, awkwardly, with chairs scraping back and family members dispersing into the living room or out the front door to escape the tension. Jessica remained seated for several minutes after everyone else had moved, staring down at the tablecloth as if it held answers. Marcus spoke quietly with my dad near the sideboard, while Mom busied herself with dishes she didn't actually need to clear yet. When I finally stood, Jessica looked up at me. There was no remorse in her expression, no shame, just that familiar flash of resentment, the same look she'd given me the day she confessed about David. In that instant, I knew nothing had changed. Not then, not now, not ever. I didn't say goodbye. I collected my coat, slipped my arm through Marcus's, and we left together without looking back, the cool night air wrapping around us as the door clicked shut. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. I wish you hadn't brought all that up last night. I stared at it before replying. I wish I hadn't needed to. Then I blocked Jessica's number, deleted our few remaining mutual contacts, and set my phone down with the quiet finality of closing a book you'll never open again. Over the following weeks, there were small ripples in Anne checking in. A cousin texting that she'd never known the whole story, but I didn't engage. My life moved forward, work pulling me back into its familiar rhythm of client meetings, creative sessions, and the controlled chaos of advertising shoots. Marcus and I traveled, laughed, made plans without ever factoring Jessica into the equation. One evening months later, I found myself reflecting on that family dinner. Not with bitterness or triumph, but with the clarity that comes when a wound has finally healed. I realized my revenge hadn't been the confrontation itself, had been taking back control of the narrative, ensuring that this time she couldn't rewrite history to make herself the victim or the winner. She had stolen something from me once, and I'd let her keep it to avoid the mess. This time, she'd tried again and been stopped cold in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to her. That was the consequence she'd never believed would come. As I sat there, Marcus's laughter drifting from the kitchen where he was attempting to cook dinner for the third time that week, I felt a quiet, steady certainty settle in my chest. I had closed the door on her for good, and I wasn't opening it again. Silence, I discovered, can feel heavier than noise. For weeks after that dinner, my phone stayed eerily quiet. No calls from Mom asking when I'd visit. No random texts from distant relatives about birthdays or holidays. Jessica had gone radio silent too, which suited me perfectly. It was the kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I made the choice quickly, faster than I'd expected. There would be no gradual fade, no partial boundaries that left cracks for anyone to slip through. I sent one final message to the family group chat. I wish you all well. But I'm choosing to step away from this family dynamic. My life is better without the drama and constant disrespect. Then I left the chat, blocked the numbers, and archived everything so I wouldn't be tempted to look back. In Portland, days stretched into something brighter. Marcus and I found our rhythm late dinners after shoots, quiet mornings on my apartment balcony, spontaneous weekend trips to the coast where we could disappear into small towns that didn't care who we were. Every so often, he'd look at me over coffee and say, "Best decision you ever made." And I'd know he wasn't just talking about cutting my family off, though in a way he was. The proposal came quietly, without fanfare, one evening at Cannon Beach. After a long walk along the shoreline, no cameras, no spectacle, just Marcus. pulling a small velvet box from his jacket and telling me he wanted every morning and every night with me for the rest of his life. I said yes without hesitation. We married the following summer in a small ceremony in the Columbia River Gorge. The sun was warm, the air smelled of wildflowers and pine, and not a single member of my birth family was there. The people who stood beside us were the ones who had earned their place, friends who had become family, colleagues who had supported us through every transition. As we danced under string lights that night, Marcus leaned down and whispered, "I think you finally got the ending you deserved." I smiled, not because of revenge, but because he was right. Jessica no longer had space in my life to try again. Mom no longer had room to make excuses for her. And I no longer had to carry the weight of what they'd done. The door was closed, sealed, and locked. In its place, I had built something better. And this time, I wasn't letting anyone take it away.